Hello everyone, Caresoft Technology would like to welcome you to our SailPoint webinar, Accelerating Access to Applications. This webinar is the second of an 8-part webinar series. If you're interested in learning more about the series, reach out to Caresoft. Our contact information will be displayed at the end of the webinar. Please look out for information regarding the upcoming webinars. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few agenda items. All of your lines have been muted to reduce background noise, and we hope you take advantage of the Q&A pod on the left side of your screen. We will do our best to answer all of your questions at the end of the presentation. If for some reason we do not get to your questions, we will follow up with you offline. Caresoft is a trusted IT solutions provider delivering software and support solutions to federal, state, and local government agencies. Caresoft maintains dedicated teams to support sales and marketing for all of its vendors, including SailPoint, VMware, Dell Technologies, Adobe, and Red Hat. Our contact information will be at the end of the presentation, so please don't hesitate to call or email us for any of your needs. This webinar is being recorded and a copy of it will be emailed to you. At this time, I would like to introduce our speaker for today, Matt Topper, President and Solutions Catalyst at UberEther. Matt, the floor is all yours.
Hey, thank you so much. So in our last session of the series, we talked a little bit about the data that drives identity and access management or identity governance implementations and how to look beyond just your HR systems and some other places, especially in the government area where we might find additional data to help drive governance processes. Today, we'll talk a little bit about the next step that many organizations take to governing their applications and figuring out how to determine what apps come first and really figure out what the priorities are, which pieces are the most important, and what's going to drive the most value to the organization. So as was mentioned, we will send you the recording. Please submit Q&A. The whole purpose of this series is many people are in the midst of their governance programs or planning to do their governance programs and have questions about how to do it the right way. Obviously, I have an opinionated way of doing it based on lots of integrations of the past, but this is really for all of you. So please ask questions. We're more than happy to help answer them. So today, we'll talk about how to easily onboard applications. Many of our organizations have thousands of applications across the board. Some are 10, 15, 20 years old, going back to mainframes, while at the same time we're trying to drive to brand new cloud applications and manage things in AWS and Azure and privileged accounts there and rapidly changing worlds with Kubernetes and Istio and some of the other privileged access management technologies. And it's hard, right, to determine which applications are the most important to the organization and which ones will help you really drive the most value. So today we'll go through what I call setting the foundation, defining the metrics of success, building your process, looking for opportunities for repeatability, and how to automate everything. I just want to point out a quick fact that came out from last year's SailPoint Market Pulse survey. 1 in 3 IT leaders are spending at least 50% of their time on administrative identity tasks, whether that's creating new accounts, approving new accounts, certifying new accounts. That's insane, right? We've got leaders who should be driving technology forward, helping us with digital transformation, helping plan our zero trust initiatives, and half of their time is spent on administrative identity tasks. So something to think about as you're planning your own internal programs. I think everybody already heard who I am, so I can just skip this slide. So let's start with setting the foundation. So I really like to ask 3 questions when I go into an organization and start up a new identity governance program. First is why, right? What is the business driver for doing identity governance? Is the organization failing audits? Is there, right, recently there's been a huge push with fire audits across the government. Are there inspector general reports that have come out to say specific activities need to be more closely monitored? Are there standard practices and procedures to bring people on board? If not, why? Is it insider threat? Is it digital transformation? Is it zero trust? And I think those last two actually point to a lot of interesting things on how to look at your organization. A lot of organizations are saying they want to push forward with digital transformation and modernizing new applications, looking to SaaS providers and different services to deliver capabilities. And those organizations and those people are normally the ones that are a little more tolerant for risk, which lets you know that you can take some more risks in your program and push a little harder or do things a little out of the box if you have those people behind you. If you're looking at zero trust, maybe it's because we're all in a COVID world and everybody all of a sudden is working from home and we can't actually buy the laptops we need to give out to all of our employees and contractors to work from home, and we need to trust all of the devices on their networks, right? Or maybe we need to, we have audit failures that we're looking for zero trust to help solve some of those things. Maybe that organization and those people you're dealing with are a little more risk adverse. And that changes how you're going to approach your identity governance processes. And then the second question I like to ask is who? Who are we really trying to manage and protect here? A lot of organizations do an excellent job with employees, right? Majority of our places have HR systems that drive when people are joining, when people are separating, when people change their roles within the organization. And those are great triggers that we can use to drive an identity governance process. I see a lot of agencies struggle with contractors, especially since there's a lot of different models for managing contractors and not everyone fits on a single contract vehicle. So if you're going down contractors, you might have a harder path initially. Obviously, with the OPM hack and CDM, a lot of focus has been on privileged users. I think today most organizations in the government have a good idea knowing where those privileged users are and who they are, but I'm not sure we're doing the best job governing them and looking, saying, hey, this person just left the organization. Hey, this person's part of this program, so these are the privileged resources they should have. It's really just in most agencies I've seen, a listing of here's all of our privileged targets, and anyone can really request access to any of them, and there's no real policy behind it. Are you looking to integrate other agencies through a federation, right? You might not want the entire agency to have access to your information sharing portal, but certain subsets, absolutely. How do you manage that list of who's allowed, who's not allowed, how those invites work? Are you doing it in your own organization? Are you allowing someone from an external organization to do it? You might have business partners, large contracts, vendor relationships, right? A lot of times vendors aren't necessarily directly on contracts, but they also need to have access to help support you in your missions. And then most recently, we're seeing a lot more pushes towards service accounts and bots. So we've got services that are talking to each other, whether those are web services or microservices. We've got traditional application servers talking to databases, and those accounts need to be rotated on a regular basis, whether they're using certificates or they're using username and passwords to directly connect to those resources. Who's in charge of them? Who's the technical contact? Who's the business contact? And then we've got the new category of bots, which really introduces some interesting problems because it's really a automated process that's doing work on behalf of a user. How do you authorize that bot, right? Should I say this is Matt Topper's bot and authorize that access to basically mirror my own to these services? Or is that bot able to access that target service on behalf of a bunch of people? And is that where we need to focus on governing? Or is this more of a customer or consumer play, right? If you're the IRS, how do you govern every citizen of the United States who's looking to pay their tax bill? And then from there, once you kind of figure out who you're targeting, and that helps you get down to which applications to start looking at, right? If you're employees, well, chances are you're going to look at AD, you're going to look at Exchange, you're going to look at the HR system. If you're privileged access management, you're going to look at governing your CyberArk or your Thycotic or your Beyond Trust instances. So with that, you start asking, what are we going to start governing? So based on the why we're looking at governance, who we're looking to govern, what are the applications we're looking to manage as part of that? So look at towards building an application inventory. A lot of organizations have like the Telos products. That's a great place to start of, hey, what applications are actually in production? Where are they? How big are they? How many users do they have? Take a look at your existing processes for gaining access to those applications. When we looked across the DoD, everything's really driven by a 2875 form, which is a 15-year-old PDF form that gets filled out and signed with a CAC card, emailed to a manager, and then emailed to a security officer and emailed to an application owner, right? That's not real. And right, some places have built some automated processes or SharePoint portals to help track that along, but that's not a real efficient process. But I think that's where many of our organizations and granting access to applications lie today. So huge opportunities around that. Take a look at your help desk, right? Where are the biggest tickets coming in? Where are they spending the most amount of their time? And with a lot of organizations, this is a difficult problem to solve because we've got tier 1, tier 2 help desks tied to just about every individual application. There's been a ton of work with ServiceNow pushing to a centralized framework for that, but it's probably a really strong place to look and see where's a lot of time being spent, right? Where's a lot of manual processes in place that we could automate and solve a problem. We just had one of our people join a new program. He had 3 accounts created. He has a very simple name, Matthew Volo. He had 3 accounts created with the agency. Each one of those had a misspelling in his name, and none of those accounts linked up. We're doing identity governance, hoping to solve that, but right, if simple names, simple things like that are getting messed up, we're losing a ton of time and efficiencies, as well as the ability to trace people if we do have something like a leak and need to try and find accounts. That's a wasted time. Where are authoritative identity sources? As I mentioned, HR, contractor management, all of those type of things, training systems, stuff we all talked about the last time we went through this. And then a lot of times today, we talk about the efficiencies of shutting people's access off, right? There seems to be a misnomer that, oh, every organization has, at least in government, a PIV or a CAC card, and if we take that card away, people can't get access. Well, that's not always true. How many of our organizations have an ability to call the help desk and say, hey, I forgot my PIV card at home today. Can you give me a temporary username and password? So when we separate people and take their PIV cards away, we also have to disable their accounts, or else they can come back in and get data. I know of one government organization that was taking PIV and CAC cards away, and they had some contractors come back in as part of the procurement, and were looking up procurements and dollar figures after they had left the agency by 6+ months, and magically their organizations were winning some new contracts. So that, right, those, and then they got access through calling in the help desk once a week and saying, hey, I forgot my PIV card, and it never got turned off. And then compliance requirements, right? I mentioned the fire audits. We've got IG audits. We've got different PHI health information auditing requirements, PII requirements, right? Those are all the what's of what's driving our practice, or driving our identity governance solutions. So from there, we should have a really good idea of the number one drivers for the identity governance solution, right? We've got the what are we trying to tackle? Who are we trying to tackle it for? And really all of the applications that could be targets for that. So that'll give us an idea of what are the large drivers and KPIs, and we can start defining our targets, right? Do we want to cover large populations, right? Do we want to say, hey, I know these are all my external access points. It's Active Directory to do an authentication to allow access to some online portals. It's the VPN to allow the machines to log in. It's our VDI environment to allow people to do a virtual desktop to come in. What's the authentication source for those targets? And if we have someone separating, how do we turn it off quickly, right? Maybe that's the ones you target first. Or maybe it's, hey, everyone on their first day, guess what? They get an AD account and they get email. Today, they probably get Teams access as well, right? or Skype or Slack, depending on what your agency runs with. But right, what are the big things that gets everybody productive within their first 2 weeks on the job? And then are we looking for efficiencies, right? Is that what came out of that environment or those discussions? So reducing manual tasks and mistakes, as I said about the account correlations. So again, what covers the big populations? What makes sure those accounts get tied in quick? Reducing risk after separation, or the critical systems, right? You've got that application list and you know that you have audit problems, you've got SOX problems, you've got PII problems, right? Are those the things that you need to go after first to make sure the agency doesn't get in trouble with the next IG report, to make sure that you're still getting your funding if some of these initiatives are tied to the funding things, right? And from there, that'll really help you build a prioritization matrix. As I said, all of these agencies have thousands of applications that could be pulled into this, but it's not always the best idea to try and swallow the elephant and do them all. So based on your discussions, you're going to want to build a prioritization matrix. So I know the top's a little hard to see here, but you basically build yourself a weighted prioritization score and a tier of applications you want to bring in. And you've got discussion points like, what's the organizational influence on this application, right? Is this something that's being driven by the director of the agency? Are they really hard talking at every single town hall about the push to the cloud, right? Is this the CIO's main driver, right? So those are organizational influences where if you are helping them to succeed, you look good, your programs continue to grow, you continue to get more funding, and everybody's happy, right? Is there PII impact? Is there SOX impact? Is there PCI impact, right? Those don't normally fall in most government organizations. So maybe you're looking at PHI data. Maybe you're looking at CDM targets here. Is it a critical system or a management priority? How many users are part of that system, right? If it's something that only has maybe 200 of 300,000 users, is it a priority? It might be. It could be the financial system. It could be the HR system, right? Just depending on your audits, those attributes or those scores will affect your prioritization. And then you also need to start looking at things like complexities, right? Is it a custom connector? Is it a direct connector? And build these things all into this. SailPoint has a great template for this on their community page. We also have one as well, so feel free to reach out, and I'm more than happy to share that. And take a look at those. Look at the volume of access requests yearly, right? If this is something that we just worked with a customer where they had 12 full-time people creating, updating, and deleting accounts for one application, right? That's something where hundreds of thousands of people were getting added, updated, and deleted on a yearly basis, right? Ginormous opportunity for automation and cost recovery there. So, and at the same time, right, as I said, thousands of apps don't boil the ocean. Focus on time to integration. If you spend a year or 2 years to get half a dozen apps, you're not going to get the focus and the movement you want. Look at the things that drive business impact. Sometimes it's good enough just to create the accounts and turn off the accounts and allow things like role management or entitlements or group management to stay in the application for a little while, right? You want to lock people out when they leave the agency, but not, but those other things might have to have a whole bunch of custom interfaces and APIs for those accounts. That might not be your best route in the first year. Maybe that's something you say, we're just going to do the account creation side and it's an Active Directory integration. So that's kind of on this easy integration, little bit of complexity, right? And that's where you go there. Sometimes an email's okay too. I know everyone wants to have automated provisioning. Everyone wants to have automatically created. But sometimes because the interfaces are so hard or because you've got something that doesn't provide an interface to do external integration, sending an email to an application's help desk is okay, right? Allow them to create the accounts and then just create a connector or a weekly process to go grab those accounts out of the database, pull them into a delimited flat file, and just make sure they did their job and make sure that nobody actually created the accounts outside of the process. And if they did, throw another flag to the application owner. And then nobody likes to hear this, but in most cases, you've only got about 3 years really to make a major impact with these programs at most agencies, right? It's a spend for the organization. You've got get executive buy-in to make the purchases, and you really have to show value in your first 3 years. So pay attention to those organizational drivers. Make sure you're driving access and security to the things that the director talks about, and then your program will continue to live on. If you spend 2 years focused on half a dozen applications, I don't see most organizations getting that type of impact. So, so that's really how we help figure out what the best applications are. And then once we start integrating applications, we look for patterns. A lot of times we see this same cycle, right? You've got a user that is making an access request for an application that goes to n tiers of approvals, right? Whether that's hey, no approval needed, go ahead and provision it out and create that account, or hey, it needs to go to a manager, and then they don't need a second level approval, so we can provision the account, or oh, it needs to go to the manager, then it needs to go to the security officer, and then we can provision it. Or in the case of a 2875, a manager, a security officer, an application owner, sometimes a fourth level, and then it gets the account provisioned. But when you see these patterns, there are capabilities in SailPoint that allow you to define templates. And this is something UberEther has built on top of, especially in the government arena, where we see a lot of these repeating patterns to help automate things. So instead of writing, I would say most application integrations are about 1,500 lines of code. We can turn an entire application integration into these 8 lines of JSON for this example, right? And this is something that an application owner themselves could actually come in and manage, right? So who's the owner? Maybe this is a person. Maybe this is a group of people. Which connection are we going to use based on if it's in the dev, the test, or the production environment? And when a person wants to make a request to any of these defined roles, what is the approval process it needs to go through? And sometimes you can change that and say we inside of our simple JSON language here, we have ways to bundle these things together and say for a admin group or manager or an admin group manager role, it's got to go through these 3 levels, but these 3 just need to go for manager approval. And you can bundle those together and turn that into all of the code to support each one of these role requests and approvals. One of the places we found, and I mentioned it earlier, that was really ripe for automation was the DD 2075 System Authorization and Access Request form that's used across the entire DoD. So you've got this traditional PDF form is this a new account request? Is it a modification to an existing account? Is it a deactivation of an existing account? And let me tell you, this deactivation in many cases rarely happens when the people leave because there is no automated system and no trigger for the people to say they've left. This is a case where we see a lot of CAC cards being taken and no internal account governance going on, right? But you've got all these spots where people can either handwrite or hand type in first name, last name, email addresses, and these are all things that, right, you really have an opportunity for failure, right? So if we're able to pull this data from an authoritative source, like the HR system, like the contractor management system, like the CAC card system in the case, or DMDC feeds in the case of the DoD, all of this information is populated automatically by the system, and we don't have any of those fat finger problems, any of those delay problems, any of those multiple accounts being created with their last names all being misspelled. So what we built was a metadata language extending our existing language specifically for the DoD. So in this case, we can do a ton of application integrations and don't actually have to connect to the target systems. Because these are paper forms that get put around email boxes or printed out and slid into filing cabinets, we don't have a good place to host these online and know what people have access to applications. So just the fact that we have a centralized system now that can validate, hey, has this person taken acceptable use policy training? Have they taken their information awareness training for the year? If not, they don't even get the ability to access this application or make a request to it, right? Simple line, but a lot of power. Right? What are the approvals for this? What are the roles that we're trying to support as part of this? Right? Simply put into code. So then once we check that into the system, the first step, the form's pretty much already filled out, right? Here's their username, here's their contractor type, here's their unique identifier, here's their email. We also know that their AUP training was taken on 9/30 of 19, and they're within we still got 3 days left from when we took the screenshot of when their IA training was completed, right? We might have a business rule in here that says, hey, this is going to expire in 3 days. We're going to approve your account, but if you don't get it updated, we're going to revoke that account pretty much immediately because you haven't done your yearly training, right? And build those reminders into the system, which is something you never get with the paper process. And then allow them to select those systems here and create them. So, right, they hit the submit button as the initial requester, and it goes over to their manager once they've selected DPass here, and their manager can continue filling out the form online. We can actually populate some of this information, and then here it's also gone on to the security officer, and we've already gone out to the authoritative source for that security data and populated it for them to say, hey, we know that they had an investigation on 9/30 of last year, surprisingly, not really, that it's also the same day we put them in their information awareness training for the demo, but they already have a secret, so they're good to go, right? And then they can submit it. And at that point, the system automatically generates that form because we've gone through all of the approval processes. We now have a digital record of everyone who signed off, when it was done. We now have the ability to do reminders on the yearly basis, to do the annual renewals, the annual certifications. And today, in a lot of these systems, this goes off to their help desk to actually create the account. And then we just get a feed on a scheduled basis that validates that the accounts were properly created to do that reminder. And the big target systems, we do those direct connections, right? Is this the DoD agency's AD, right? That's a big one, right? That's where you can get in from the outside or get access through, is it the CVR environment right now, right? How do we turn those off when people separate? But that's really has saved thousands upon thousands of development hours a year, in that we can write these really simple little lines. We can actually turn these over to application owners in some cases, or business analysts, so we don't have to hire or train lots of developers to onboard thousands of applications, and then automatically they get added into the system. We did the same thing with DHS headquarters, where they had a series of financial management applications across all of their components and hundreds of roles that needed to be managed as part of that. And because they were the same roles across the systems, we were able to drive any changes very, very quickly, instead of having to manually recode them each time a priority or an approval process changed. So key takeaways from today: work with your leadership teams, work with your stakeholders to define the goals of the program. Define your targets. What are the most important metrics and impacts for the organization? That'll drive your application level priorities and help you determine what, out of the thousands of applications you might be asked to onboard, which ones are going to provide the most value. Look for patterns to accelerate where things are repeatable, and delegate that out to application owners or business analysts, where you can get them a lot easier and faster than you might SailPoint developers today. And then, as much as you can, automate those things so they're being pushed into production on a regular basis, so your developers and system engineers aren't spending time deploying code and updates and those changes are being rolled out in near real time so they can focus on driving more business value to your program. So with that, I know we're driving over time a little bit here, stop for questions. And Raj, I saw you asked a question about the slides. Feel free to use the hello email address here if you want the slides directly. And then we will also send out the recording of this in the next few days. So, all right, so we'll a little bit of time for any additional questions. One question we did have is who makes the final decisions about what applications go first and how different items in the matrix are weighed. So a lot of times always you should have an executive stakeholder committee as part of your identity governance program, right? Anytime something touches so many parts of your organization and is changing business processes, you need to have that executive level buy-in and have monthly check-ins, monthly reports to them. These are all C-level or director level people across the agency. And really, you present to them, hey, based on our interviews, these are the priorities of the organization today. This is what our matrix looks like, and this looks like the applications that we're going to tackle first, right? And you just build trust every month. Hey, we tackled these ones. These are the next ones we're going after. These are the next ones we're going after. And allow them to continue tweaking that matrix. But at some point over a period of 3-4 months, normally they gain the trust in you and say, you guys got it now, keep running. And then you just brief them on what's coming next. Sometimes they'll say, hey, did you know this new thing's happening? It's a big driver for this group. And they bring the new applications to you. So really use your stakeholders to be successful there. And then another question we had was, how do you scale out these applications integrations if you have a large number to complete in a short period of time? So with that, what we normally do is run an agile sprint style engagement where you build a backlog of all of the applications, and we develop a app intake team that goes and does all of the interviews, all of the decision making on or all of the discussions on how people are onboarded, how the processes work, how people are governed, and then push that into the backlog of applications and use that team to say, hey, here's a whole bunch of ones that do JDBC stuff. Here's a whole bunch of ones that are going to be doing file delimited. Here's a bunch of more complex ones that are doing web service integration directly with the applications where there's not a connector that already exists. And then behind that app intake team, we have N levels of app integration teams. Some are more senior than others, so those are probably the ones we're going to give the harder web service direct integrations with. The JDBC, the file delimited ones are pretty common when you're doing these implementations. So maybe that's a more junior team, but you basically have these N integration teams, and each one of them is on their own sprint schedule to drive them out over 2-week sprint plans. So that gives them an ability to take all of that app intake data, work off each individual application, present that back to the application owners in parallel, and then drive those into production through checking in the code to Git. And then with that, you also have a core engineering team that when those patterns are found, are building the tools to help accelerate the rest of the applications coming down the pipe. So, Greg, will DoD eliminate the need for personal digital signature and use system signature to make the process easier? So I do think, so today it is a ISSO application by application decision, whether or not, as you all saw, the signed PDFs, we are signing it with a system certificate. We have done the due diligence with many of the ISSOs and the application owners to show the audit trail, showing the CAC authentication on the front end of SailPoint, us having that audit log, being able to trail through exactly when the person logs in, tie it to their session, show them submitting the data, showing the email going out to their manager, showing the CAC authentication of the manager, right? Keeping that whole audit trail every step through the process. And many have been receptive, and many have also said, yep, this meets the exact intention of what's being done. This is a more modern digital way of doing it. And many have also said, we don't even need the piece of paper anymore as long as you can point me to the audit trail to show it on a yearly basis. So in those cases, we're directly integrating with the applications and creating the accounts without having to generate the PDF. But yeah, so I fully believe that is the future. And I think once we actually get a bunch of the 2875 data into the system and we're able to show the ability to generate enterprise roles, which is something that really can't be done today without a lot of manual effort, using that data from the 2875 forms to drive those, we might be able to change that process completely and do 2875s by roles, which give access to many applications at the same time without having to do, I just got onboarded to a DoD agency, and I think I'm up to 12 2875s at this point. So, and there are things that everyone gets. So trust me, a lot of chances for efficiency there. So, all right, we'll give people about another 30 seconds for any more questions. Just want to say thank you, everybody, for joining today. Hopefully that was some good information. I know these are always a fire hose approach, being only 30 minutes long, but some good information for you all. Next month, we're going to talk about mastering data quality. In the first session, we talked about those data sources. Now we're going to talk about how to make sure your data quality is strong and make sure that you have the processes built in to catch bad data so that you're not waking up one morning and realizing that 10,000 accounts were terminated overnight because you got a bad file from your source system. Ask me how I know, because I wrote the code. So it'll be a good one next time. That's on September 17th. Favorite bourbon. I have to say the Identiverse Whistle Pig Barrel Pick right now is definitely my favorite. That bottle will probably be empty soon. But behind that, I like the Four Roses Small Batch right now. So thanks, Greg. I'll look forward to sharing a glass with you next time we can actually travel and see each other in person. So, all right, Catherine, I think I'll turn it back to you now to close out and look forward to seeing everyone on September 17th.
All right, thank you, Matt, for the presentation. I'd also like to thank all of our participants for being with us today. We hope this webinar has been helpful for you and your organization. As a reminder, this webinar was recorded and a copy of the presentation will be emailed to you. If we were unable to answer any of your questions, we will reach out to you offline to follow up. But if you have any further questions or would like to request more information, feel free to contact the SailPoint team here at Caresoft. Our contact information is displayed on your screen, so please don't hesitate to call or email us. Thank you and have a great day.